So hello, thank you very much for the welcome. Um, Normally for these sort of events, this was a little bit more formal than I was prepared for. I didn't expect such a nice theater and such a nice looking audience, some people in suits. Even in Silicon Valley, usually I'm lucky if people are wearing a decent t-shirt without holes in it. So thank you very much. Normally I have to do this big song and dance about who I am and where I'm from, but if you guys don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit more directly. Since we're here talking about execution and why execution matters, I think it's only appropriate that we kind of try and get a little bit to the heart of the issue. So briefly, I am Tristan Kromer. I work at a company called Luxor. You can find out plenty about it online. I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I'd first like to talk about what this means. So this is the title of the conference, Execute for Success. And that's great. We know that execution matters, right? We know that if you have a good idea with no execution, that's worthless. We know that because we all have good ideas. We're all entrepreneurs here, right? How many people are entrepreneurs here? Okay, great. So you all have good ideas, right? But it doesn't matter if we don't do anything about it. How many people here are profitable entrepreneurs? Okay, less hands. That happens. I've run a startup straight into the ground. It's a common story in Silicon Valley. In fact, I tell you a secret, something that usually people in other countries are very surprised about. When I started my first business, nobody called me to congratulate me. Nobody called me to say, like, that's awesome, that's great, congratulations for starting your own business. In Silicon Valley, when I failed my first business, when I shut it down, I wrote an announcement and I explained all the reasons why it shut down, and we didn't have the right product, for the right market. And I got more letters of compliments and congratulations for shutting down my business than I ever did for succeeding. It was very, very strange. And I think it comes from a very specific mindset in Silicon Valley that failure is not particularly bad. And it's kind of refreshing because I see that same mindset traveling across the world. I see now more, I do a lot of work in Mexico. When I met my first group of 20 entrepreneurs from Mexico that came to Silicon Valley to do a series of workshops that I organized, a lot of them were very afraid of failure. They said, if I fail, well then that's it. They'll never give me another chance. And now those same people are working on their third startup, their fourth startup. Some of them are successful. Some of them are running startup weekends to help other entrepreneurs. Some of them are putting together their own accelerator programs. So this is extremely exciting for me because it means that the virus of entrepreneurship is spreading a little bit more. But again, I'm digressing. We want to talk about what this means. What is execute for success? So we know ideas are not enough. We know that we have to actually do something about it. We can't just dream and imagine that it will happen. But what is execution? Execution means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So how many people here are engineers? Okay, not so many, maybe a quarter, third. So this is execution, right? Writing code. This is my code. This is not very good code. You can see a lot of to-dos in it. But this is what execution means, right? Do the engineers agree? One kind of goes like, there's a couple of like, all right, good. That's definitely not enough. You can't just write code. I can write 12 months of code, and that certainly doesn't mean success. It just means I have a product running on a server somewhere that nobody cares about. Nobody's actually using. There's other definitions of execution. You can go out and build a prototype. This is one form of execution, but is that enough? Not really, not unless somebody uses it. Then there's my favorite type of execution, right? We heard about business plans. Writing business plans is awesome. You can spend a lot of time writing business plans. This must be an excellent business plan because it has at least 12 different sections. So it must be extremely well thought out. It probably has a PowerPoint or an Excel sheet. This is an extremely impressive. This takes a lot of time to organize. It goes 5 years into the future. This is mine. I actually made this. Look how many tabs it has. Swear to God, I made this for a business. It converted currencies into Vietnamese dong from US dollars and then into euro because it was an international company. Total waste of time. How many designers do we have in the house? If there's one, you're awesome. Everybody should hire this person. Designer is very important. I hope you brought business cards. So this is another form of execution, right? Let's make a logo. Let's make business cards. Let's do some marketing. But that's not enough either. You can do all the marketing you want, but if you don't have the product, of course, nothing happens. So what is execution? So my hypothesis, my proposition to you, is that execution equals learning. It's not about building stuff. It's not about writing plans. It's not about even marketing. It's not about sales. But all of those things together can help us learn something. And what we have to learn about is whether or not our business idea has any merit whatsoever, whether or not any one person actually cares about the product we're building, whether anybody actually has the problem that we think they have. So I come from a high technology background, right? We work in Silicon Valley and we make all sorts of truly ridiculous products. You know, products to make you push a button to tell us where you are each day. You know, Foursquare. Do you guys use Foursquare here? Yay! Awesome. Check in. Done. Like, what is this? This is like one of the most bizarre products in the world to me because it's just all you're doing is pressing a button. But it's kind of fun. So we build a lot of products like that. And some of them are great, and some of them are complete waste of time, and some of them are just frivolous entertainment. That's cool. But all of them at the heart target a specific problem or a desire that human beings have, the desire to be recognized, I am here. The desire to say, sometimes even something as silly as, here's what I'm having for breakfast. That's Twitter, right? Here's what I'm having for breakfast. Hopefully something a little bit more. But so my proposition is that execution is actually learning about what people want you to deliver. And for me, I'm very involved in the lean startup movement. Has anybody heard about lean startup here? Yes, some people. Oh, quite a lot of people. How many people have read about Steve Blank? Wow. How many people have read this book? That's actually much more than most people. Most people open this book, they read 3 pages, and then they close this book and immediately put it somewhere very safe. It's a very, very complicated book. It's very difficult to read. Most people I know never actually read it. Steve Blank actually wrote a much easier to understand book called The Startup Owner's Manual, which I highly recommend. It's a much better version of the 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Steve Blank is kind of the progenitor of the lean startup movement. Before Eric Ries, Steve Blank was one of Eric Ries's investors and mentors. He came up with this idea that startups were fundamentally different from established businesses. And they were fundamentally different because the risks that were involved in a startup were entirely of a different kind. In an established business, something like IBM or Oracle, you're dealing with companies that really understand the market. They're already in an established market. They're in an established operating procedure. And in those cases, a business plan makes sense because they know what's going to happen next. They have projections. They have Gartner research reports that say what's going to happen 5 years from now. And they're pretty accurate. Sometimes they're not so accurate. Sometimes you have a financial crisis or something like that. Sometimes you have a tsunami, but generally not so bad. So they operate in a totally different way. They operate with different departments doing different things and specializing, and they can all coordinate that activity thanks to the business plan. But for a startup, even if it's a non-technology startup, a lot of the times the risk isn't in whether or not you can execute. It's in we don't know. We don't know what the market is. We're creating new markets. 3D printers are creating an entirely new market. Nobody knows how big that market is going to be, although we think it's going to be pretty big. We don't know how fast it's going to grow. We have all sorts of market risks that we can't possibly answer. So writing a business plan about what's going to happen 5 years from now in a market that we don't understand, that we don't know anything about, that doesn't exist yet, is absurd. It's an absurd idea that we can just write a business plan, somebody will give us wads of money, and that, yeah, then we'll just execute it and figure it out. But that's the way things have gone for years and years and years until much more recently, when this became unfundable. A lot, thanks to the financial crisis, actually, a lot of startups couldn't be funded anymore. They couldn't write their business plan and get lots of money. So we had to think of new ways to do things. And the advancement of open source technology has, at least in my sector in technology, enabled us to build products at a radically faster pace. We can build products amazingly fast. So the risk we face now isn't whether or not we can build it. It's not whether or not we can execute it. It's whether or not we should build it, whether or not this has any value whatsoever, whether or not ideas have any value whatsoever. So Steve Blank came up with this thing. He said there are 4 main portions. There's customer discovery, which is let's figure out about our customer. Let's figure out what the problem is. Then let's validate whether our solution fits that customer. So whether or not there is a product, so whether or not there is a market for our product, and whether or not those 2 things fit together. And then, if we figure out we make a mistake, let's go back to step 1, and let's do it again. So this idea that we might be wrong, and that we have to figure out what the right answer is. So this is something Eric Ries called a pivot. We can make a lot of fun of that term. It's a very popular word to say pivot. I don't know if it's quite as ridiculous over here. Has it gotten silly here yet? Has anybody here pivoted their business idea this morning? No? Okay. Good. Sometimes we hear this in Silicon Valley, like, oh yeah, I pivoted my business idea twice this morning. I'm like, no, you didn't. You just changed your mind. There's a big difference. Maybe we'll get into that a little later. Anyway, so those first 2 steps are really the most critical steps for me. That's where the most learning goes on. Of course, afterwards, you have to talk about how you're going to scale your marketing, how you're going to scale your actual company, your HR, and so forth. But that all comes after product market fit. So this is Mark Andreessen's term, I believe. After product market fit, of course, things are a lot easier. We're just talking about how do we get more customers, how do we build more cars and widgets and buttons. But before that, it's all about learning. Because before we learn that, we could pay millions of dollars and get millions of customers to our website or our storefront. And they would all go in, and they'd turn around and leave because we don't know what they want. Of course, we think we do, but generally we don't. So Steve Blank's main mantra was get out of the building, because you need to get out of the building, talk to your customers, and maximize your learning. Maximize how you're going to learn about your product. So what is execution? Execution equals learning. And then Eric Ries comes along. And Eric Ries says, how do you learn? Well, first of all, you need to build something. Okay? Could be a product, could be a website, whatever you want. So you generate some code. We like to code. A lot of us are engineers, so we like writing code. It's very enjoyable. It keeps us up until 4 o'clock in the morning. Like I was up until 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday coding. Then we try and measure something. Is it working? Is anybody using it? That generates some data, and hopefully from that data we can learn. And then we come up with a new idea. And this was his kind of basic theory. It's a very simple theory. The United States Air Force has a very similar theory that they actually use in combat. It's called OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act. It's a very fast loop. So this is, fighter pilots use this theory. Okay, fighter pilots. This is not something that takes months. This is not a plan for 5 months in advance. This is something you do immediately. Look, learn, listen, act. But anyway, so back to our problem. So in Silicon Valley, we usually say your runway. That's the amount of time a plane takes to get off the ground, the amount of time your startup has to take off the ground, is the cash you have in your pocket divided by your burn rate, the rate at which you're spending it. So your runway is 12 months, let's say. That's important, but there's one thing about this concept. After we've gone out and we've raised 12 months worth of money, maybe we borrowed it from the bank, maybe we borrowed the money from our friends and family to build a prototype. But we have this runway, and what we have to realize is that 12 months does not mean we're going to learn anything. You can spend 12 months coding and learn absolutely nothing. So what do we have to do to actually learn something? We have to go through the build, measure, learn loop. We have to learn what do our customers actually want. And one of the interesting things about this loop is we find that a well-funded startup, so let's say Segway, that was a well-funded startup. You guys all know what a Segway is? I haven't seen any on the streets, but yeah, we all like Segway. Very well-funded startup, yes. Or Sirius. Sirius was a phone company, right? They wanted to build satellite phones. The phones were about this big. They weighed about a brick. That was a very well-funded startup, hundreds of millions of dollars putting satellites into orbit. They were very well-funded, like this could be well-funded. We could have a 2-year runway. And if we build something once per year, there's a very simple math behind this, right? We have 2 chances. Okay? We have one chance to build something, and then if it works, great. If it doesn't work, well, now we can course correct and learn something. But now we've learned something new in Silicon Valley. If we build things faster, if we build things smaller, in very small iterations, we can beat well-funded startups like Sirius and Segway. Because Sirius and Segway, as probably many of you knew, are rather large and abysmal failures. Because by the time they finished building their things, I don't know how long the Segway took. Was it 5 years? Does anybody know? 5 years? 7 years? They finally launch in a big boom, and they discovered, wow, this is not going to change cities. They're not going to redesign the roads for this little thing. It's cute. Now the tourists use it in San Francisco after launching like 7 years ago. But nobody actually wants that, so they didn't learn anything. They only had one iteration. They launched, and then that was it. Segway today is pretty much the same thing. It's gotten a little better technologically, but the problem is not that the technology isn't brilliant. It is brilliant. The problem is that nobody wants it, and they failed to learn that. So, what can we do? As a small company, we can do something very simple. We can take our less money, maybe 1 month of runway, and we can do another simple equation. If we can, instead of spending that entire month building something and have one chance, what if I just build something very small? What if I build something very, very small to test our theory? What if I just build a landing page and see, will anybody click on this? Will anybody buy it? I could build a payment page before I actually build the product. I could pre-sell my own version of the Segway. And this is something that's becoming more and more common. Do you guys know Kickstarter? Yes, some people? So those of you that don't know Kickstarter, Kickstarter is this wonderful website where people will just post a video of what they're going to build. And they say, I'm going to build, what was my favorite one? Like an alarm clock that is going to not vibrate when it's 7 o'clock in the morning. It's going to watch me. And it's going to watch me when I'm tossing and turning a little bit in bed, because that means I'm not sleeping, I'm in my light sleep cycle. And then when I'm in my light sleep cycle, maybe it's 6:45, maybe it's 6:30, it will then vibrate and wake me up out of my light sleep cycle. So it's a much nicer way to wake up. And these guys just made a video, and they say, that's what we're going to build. And we'll post it on Kickstarter. And miraculously, everybody bought it. They bought it for, I think it was $40 or something like that. And they bought them in the hundreds. They raised more money than they could possibly need for a prototype, for a product that didn't even exist yet. And how long did it take them to make that video? 1 day? 1 hour? That's it. Just to learn the most important thing of all. Does anybody want that? So, 1 month runway with 1 day iterations will beat a larger, more well-funded company that is not as focused on iterating, in learning, in going through that build, measure, learn loop. So our cash on hand doesn't equal our runway. What equals our runway is the number of iterations we can perform. If we can perform iterations, if we can learn something, that gives us each additional iteration is an additional chance to course correct, to learn where our product is wrong and how we can fix it and make it better. So that is the most important thing. Again, execution has to equal learning. We can't just build something. We can't just write a business plan. We can't just market blindly. We have to learn something. So let me put it one other way. The time you spent building stuff, whatever it is directly correlated to the chance you have that you build the wrong stuff. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be a nice plant, an engineered plant which monitors the plant and tells you the best amount of water to put in it, automated. This could be awesome. This could be amazing. I actually kind of want one of these. Sounds kind of cool. So maybe that's the validation for this product today, is that I actually want one. It'd be especially good because now I'm gone for 3 weeks and I'm pretty sure my plants are all dead. Anyway, so the amount of time we spend building stuff is directly correlated to the risk we have of building the wrong stuff. And when we do build the wrong stuff, because generally, and I know this will surprise you, we're human beings, we make mistakes, we're very often wrong, we have to go back to the beginning again. That's it. That's your one shot. So what we really want to do is, again, to break this very, very large problem down into very small incremental solutions. We want to find a solution that is maybe just like 30% of the problem, which solves just enough of the problem to get somebody interested, to find that one person who's really suffering, who really has a lot of pain, and sell it to that person. Because that person, that's the definition of an early adopter. That's the definition of an early adopter, is somebody who is in such pain that they're actively seeking a solution. And I know the excuse that a lot of entrepreneurs say is well, you know, people won't want my product until they actually see it, right? When they see it, they'll realize they were suffering the entire time, that it was absolutely brilliant, and everybody wants it. That's the mass market. Like, that's awesome. Okay, fantastic if you actually get to that point. But those are the people who don't go out and buy plasma screen TVs when they first come out. The people who buy plasma screens when they first come out are early adopters. Those are the people who are willing to spend exorbitant amounts of money for a partially working prototype. A plasma screen TV that will most likely break the moment you try and install the damn thing. I hear perhaps somebody had that problem. Yes. I've got this thing in, it's working really great. It's not compatible with anything else I own. So, we want to break this into small incremental learning so that when we do make a mistake, it's not such a big deal. We don't have to re-engineer the entire product. We just have to go back just a little bit. And of course, the worst thing about this, and the engineers in here will back me up, is the true story here is that the longer you spend building stuff, the more likely that the business guy in your team will come to you and say, we need one more feature. And then another week will pass, and then, there's one more thing we really have to add. And by the way, we need a better logo, because our logo is okay, but it could be better. And it goes on and on and on. This is a very typical thing. This is called feature creep. We all have it. Everybody who's built a technology startup knows that as soon as the deadline is approaching, that's the time when somebody says, but we need these 3 other things. And of course, eventually you just run out of money before you actually launch. And then again, you're dead. So what we need to do is build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. So what is execution? Execution is learning. But there's one other person I think that everybody here should know. There's Steve Blank, there's Eric Ries. They're both brilliant people. If Eric Ries ever comes in this direction, or Steve Blank, they're absolutely fabulous. Definitely go and see them. But you should also know Janice Frazier. Janice Frazier, I now work for her. 3 weeks ago, I gave up my own practice. I was working also building curriculum for accelerator programs. I built an accelerator program for a nonprofit funded by the Mexican government, designed specifically to help encourage entrepreneurship in Mexico, designed to teach people the lean startup methodology, and then send them back to Mexico and have them start their own groups there. It was a fantastic program. Janice Frazier also works in a similar area, but she makes a more automated curriculum, and she's a user experience person. And I was entranced enough by what she does that I decided this is something I need to do. I need to learn more about it, user experience. Because user experience is kind of at the heart of this. Now, I didn't even ask, how many people here are technology entrepreneurs? Oh, okay, it was quite a lot. So in technology entrepreneurs in particular, I think this happens for everybody, but technology entrepreneurs have like a deep suffering of this. Like, we very often forget that human beings actually use our technology. And it seems like a very strange thing to say, but so often we're so enraptured by our own technology, our own solution, because it solves a problem that we generally have. Like, I really want to check in on Foursquare. Yeah, great. Does anybody else care? What are other people going to do with it? So user experience is a very specific thing. And this is the best way I've found to explain this. I forget the name of the gentleman who came up with this, but this is your product. Okay, here's your cornflakes. Here's your bowl. Here's your milk. Here's your Cheerios. Do you have Cheerios here? Yes? Yeah, Cheerios. Okay. User experience is not UI. This is your UI. Okay, this is user interface. User experience is totally different. This is user experience. This is a person in a specific context with emotions who is enjoying your product. That's the user experience. User experience doesn't start when somebody picks up your product. User experience is informed even by the advertising. It's the first time they hear about your product. The first time you heard about Cheerios, when you were, this tall and you were indoctrinated by advertising. You knew what to expect the first time you had Cheerios. Excitement, fun. Like, that's part of user experience. People here have Apple products, an iPhone perhaps. Okay, so anybody had to call customer support from Apple? Wow, that's pretty awesome. That's a really good user experience. I actually sometimes have to call support. My mom has a lot of Apple products. She calls customer support all the time. She still likes Apple because they're so damn nice to her. They'll let her call time and time again. That's a fantastic user experience. So the user experience continues and continues through the lifetime of the product. Everybody here uses Google, yes? Yes. Anybody tried to call customer support for Google? Did you get a response? Did anybody you got a response? No. You have to pay like $15,000 before you get a response apparently, but it is in theory possible. But that's part of their product. Of course, we're willing to forgive Google because Google is so useful, but we simply have to acknowledge that customer support and everything, the life cycle of the product, this is all user experience because it has to do with quite literally what the user experiences. And a human being is really at the heart of this. So what do I mean? This is what you have to do as an entrepreneur. Okay? This and this alone. You have an unhappy person. You want to give them something and make them into a happy person. This is not a very complex topic. Problem is that as entrepreneurs and as technology entrepreneurs, like once again, I'm very biased. I'm in the technology industry, so I talk a lot about it. Is we get obsessed by what's in the box and we forget about the people who are outside. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. The technology does not matter. The technology could be magical elves. Doesn't matter. Okay? Nobody cares. Do you know what's in your iPhone? I have no freaking idea what's in my iPhone. No clue. Here's a company who figured this out. Do you guys know this company? Aardvark? Probably not. I don't think it got over this far. This was a fascinating company. This company, I think it was started by 3 Google engineers. They thought there was this distinct problem, right? They thought that human beings had a difficult time getting answers out of Google sometimes when it's a very specific sort of question. When it's, where's the best place to get lobster in San Francisco? I don't know. I type it into Google and I get 100 different things and none of them are really what I want. What I want is just I want a human being's answer, somebody who's actually eaten there. And maybe I can try Yelp and so on and so forth, but just give me a human being to talk to. That's the problem they thought they were solving. And they had a very kind of user-centric idea of this, right? They had this page. This was their last page, but their first initial version of this was very, very similar. You just go to this web page and you put your question in, and somehow Aardvark will send this message through the intertubes, however that works, and it will get to the right person. So you've been to San Francisco, maybe you know where the best lobster is. But here's what was actually going on behind the scenes. When they first launched this product, there wasn't a magical algorithm. There wasn't any incredible technology behind this. There was 3 guys. Okay? It wasn't even the 3 guys who built it. They were busy talking to people. It was 3 interns they hired. So for almost no money, they got these 3 interns and said, sit here. We built this website. This website is going to send you an email. Okay? And you sit there, and when you get that email, figure out the answer to that question. I don't care how you do it. And they would look on Google, and they would look on Yelp, and they would make something up, and they would send it back. And that was their solution. Their solution was 3 guys. So this is called, in lean startup terminology, this is called the Wizard of Oz solution, right? So if you've ever seen the Wizard of Oz, it's this wise and powerful wizard that looks very impressive, but really it's just this guy hiding behind the curtain, pulling levers manually. Like, that was their solution. And as you can see, this was the last page they put. Aardvark is now part of Google. They were purchased for $20 million after, I think, 2 years. It's not bad. I wish I would do as well. I think it eventually got shut down, actually. I think this project is dead. But I think they're pretty happy with that outcome. I don't think they have a problem with that. So this is the sort of learning that we're talking about. We're talking about learning about human beings and how they interact with the product, seeing, are these people satisfied with the answers that they get from these 3 interns? Okay. Maybe yes, maybe no, but can we make it better? Can we make it worse? And they started automating things behind the scenes, of course, as they grew. But initially, all they needed was those 3 interns. So it's not about technology. This is about user experience. So a problem is not this abstract thing. You know, I might think that a problem outside of human beings is a problem is that dogs occasionally attack people. You know, that's a problem. Okay, yes, that's true. That does happen. That's a problem. And as an entrepreneur, I will come up with this fantastic solution. I'm going to come up with a spray better than mace, specifically targeted to dogs. You spray it at a dog, dog goes away. But that's not really what a problem is. A problem is not this separate kind of philosophical entity that you can go and solve. A problem exists in here, in a person. A problem is an emotional state, a mental state of a person in a certain context, and that's all. So this guy has no problem. He's perfectly happy. Maybe he'd like some eyes and a nose, but he's perfectly happy. The dog has no problem. The dog is perfectly happy. He doesn't care what's going on. Okay? This is the problem. Problem's not in the dog. Dog doesn't care. He's not going to bite anybody. Problem is in this guy's head. The solution for this guy isn't a spray, it's a psychologist. Okay? And if we don't understand this person, this target market, then we fail as entrepreneurs. We're going to build the wrong thing. So it's very, very important to understand actually who you're dealing with and to segment your customer down to the narrowest possible thing. Really understand what is their use case. And this is a very, probably one of the most important things. A friend of mine, Patrick Vlaskovitz, thinks that this is the most important thing about doing customer discovery, doing customer validation, is getting that incredibly tightly focused user case. I can't disagree with him. So I want to say one more thing about the build, measure, learn loop. And that is, build, measure, learn is not enough. Build, measure, learn. So Eric Ries is an engineer. Okay, so his initial theory was, well, let's go build something. Because he's an engineer. He likes to build things. If you're a carpenter, you like to build things also with wood. So he started with build, and then he said, okay, let's measure something, and then let's learn something. But interestingly enough, if you've read his book, he mentions very twice that this is actually wrong, that this is backwards. And Kent Beck has a very nice speech on this also. Kent Beck, for those of you that don't know, a very famous programmer. He created Agile programming. He's one of the original signatories of the Agile Manifesto. If you're not an engineer, just ignore that last sentence. So he said the build, measure, learn loop is backwards, actually, because what we really need to start with is, what do you want to learn? You can't just build something random and measure clicks on it and think that that's going to help you learn anything. No, you have to have a hypothesis. You have to think about it like a scientist. You have to say, what do I want to learn? And then, how am I going to go about measuring that? And then, and only then, let me go and build an experiment. So we have this term called minimum viable product in Lean Startup. How many people have heard about minimum viable product? Ooh, lots of people. Okay. So I don't like that term. I think it's a horrible term because, as you can see from Aardvark, there's no product there. It doesn't exist. Sometimes the easiest way to learn about your customers is just to go and talk to them as human beings. Hear about their problems. Sometimes you can learn more from that than anything else. The only metric you need is qualitative, not quantitative. You don't need data. You need information. And information can be easily obtained by simply talking to people, asking them, seeing their reaction. And that tends to be the most critical thing. So this is the bias from user experience perspective, and I have to say I hold that as well. So I'm going to say one more thing about execution. To me, this is a variant of Osterwalder's canvas. Osterwalder's canvas is awesome. I'm sure many of you have heard about that also. But to me, in order to make an experiment, in order to learn anything about your customer, it's not just about building a product. It's not just about creating that value statement. But you also need to have a channel to reach your customers. If you can't get any customers to it, you can't learn anything about it. You can't learn if somebody wants it or not. You have to have customers. And you have to have a way to get feedback. You have to have that relationship with the customer that allows them to reach out to you and also you to reach out to them, some way of directly contacting them. Like, that part is necessary for you to build an experiment. It's necessary for you to learn anything. So even as an engineer alone in Silicon Valley, you know, where it's kind of like the rock star dream, you know, some people will become an actor and move to LA, some people will go to New York and play the guitar. Silicon Valley, you just learn how to code a little bit and you go to Silicon Valley and build something. Like, no, it's not enough anymore. You cannot go out and just build something and expect people to use it. And you can't expect to get investment anymore either. Nowadays, investors are demanding that you actually show traction. Best way to get investment, I have 10,000 users that are actively using my product. Like, that's going to get you investment, not just like, hey, I built something over the weekend. Anybody can build something over the weekend. I'm not even a programmer. I went to business school. I can program something over the weekend. So there's no excuse anymore. It's too easy to build stuff. Now you have to really understand your market. So at Luxor, you know, there's a ton of these different tools like customer personas, Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas, another thing by Alexander Osterwalder, another thing from Luxor. These are 6-up uses. We're going to do these tomorrow in the workshop. There's Ash Mehra's canvas. These are all tools. Each of these individual tools can be used as part of our learning process. Like, that's not the question. The question is whether or not we can use the right tool at the right time to learn something and try and use more than one tool. So I like to say you need to triangulate your user experience. And sometimes that means, yes, using metrics to get one perspective, but then going out and talking to that customer and getting another perspective. And going out and doing live user testing, seeing how they're actually interacting and using with the product, get another perspective. And all of these things together can be done very, very quickly in a week, if not a day, to get a really good understanding about where our users are, where their mental state is. And that's what we really want to do when we're focused on learning. So what is execution? I think execution has to be learning. And that, I think, is the thing to focus on, hopefully tomorrow, if you're coming to the workshop tomorrow. How can we learn as quickly as possible about our customers? And how can we advance our business model? Not just in terms of writing a business plan, not just in terms of writing code, but in terms of really learning what works and what doesn't. Because the world is incredibly risky right now. Technology is incredibly fast right now. By the time you go to market, if you have a 2-year plan to go to market, the market has moved, just like Sirius. We mentioned them briefly earlier. They launched all their satellites. They had their phone about the size of a brick. By the time they launched, you know, our phones were about this big. It was the most useless waste of hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, in the history of the world, except possibly the dot-com boom. So a lot of this is a reaction to the dot-com boom. Anyway, that was kind of the main point that I wanted to say today, that execution equals learning. So I think we have questions. Or maybe not. I've heard, somebody lied to me. Somebody tried to lie to me and they said, no, the Estonians will never ask questions. I think they're lying. So who has a question? Prove them wrong.
Wait, Andres, wait 1 sec.
Hi. How do you determine which tool to use if you want to learn? Like whether to use the business model canvas or some other tool?
So the business model canvas in particular, like that doesn't help you learn anything, right? The business model canvas is designed to help you identify risks. So a lot of these tools are really designed to suck the information and the assumptions you have about your business out of your brain onto a piece of paper so that you can actually look at them and say, aha, I forgot to think about my partners. Like I was going to build this awesome thing on Twitter, and then all of a sudden, Twitter is a risk. Twitter's changed their terms of service. They've changed their policy. So it's no longer viable for me to build a business on Twitter. Like, that's a risk I might not have considered unless I actually put it out. So how do you determine that? Which tool to use? I think it comes a lot from experience. There are a lot of fantastic people. There are a lot of mentors. I've met some of the people you have here in Estonia, like Ivar and Herti. These people can definitely help you. There are lots of online tools and products. I mean, I would be a fool if I didn't mention that Luxor is providing a curriculum to help you do this. But honestly, it comes from practice. So I think being an entrepreneur is a lot like playing basketball. You guys have basketball here, right? I heard you had a basketball team. Some places you go and they're like, basketball, football. So basketball is a game of skill. Like, nobody would, you would laugh at the person who said, oh, well, just read this blog post and you'll know how to play basketball. Like, that would be crazy. But that's the way people think about many of these tools and being an entrepreneur in general. Like, oh, if I just read the right book, well, then I'll know how to be an entrepreneur. Like, it's just ridiculous. You do need practice with these things. Fortunately, a lot of these tools are incredibly simple. Like, you can learn about Osterwalder's canvas. You can make many different iterations on it. And you can learn in a week what some people haven't learned in a lifetime. But the point is, you actually have to do it. You actually have to make the business model canvas, then go out and talk to people, then go out and learn, was what I drew correct or not? And if you don't do that part, then a business model canvas is as much of a waste of time as writing a 60-page business plan. Just throw it in your drawer. You're never going to look at it again. You know, the joke we always have is that a business plan is a document that everybody insists on and nobody ever reads. So business model canvas can be the same thing. It's a lot easier to make, but that doesn't make it useful. What makes it useful is you actually going out and doing things and coming back and then adjusting. So other question. There was another gentleman here. Or not? There was a lot of these kind of random motions.
The camera.
I had a glass of water. Here we go.
Like you said about the first product, that you actually have to make it and have already some kind of customers. How would I do it if I don't have any means to do so? And of course, do it quickly. The other point I really like that a lot of projects just fade away because it takes years.
So I'm just going to restate the question to make sure I understood it. So you're asking if you don't have the resources or the skills to build something, but you have this idea.
Have the idea.
But you have the idea. So this is a very common question in Silicon Valley too, right? We have a lot of business people and they're like, well, I have this awesome idea. It's going to destroy Facebook, right? It's awesome, 900 million people. But I don't have the skills to build that. Honestly, my answer to that is that that's just nonsense. It's bullshit. Like, again, I'm a business person. It is not incredibly difficult to learn how to make a landing page. You know, there's services you can use like LaunchRock or Unbounce that will have you make a landing page without any technical skill in a matter of hours. So if that's all you need to do is to test, does anybody want this product? You know, you can use Kickstarter. You can say, let me make a video explaining my product, maybe showing a use case, maybe even showing what it would look like. And let me test the value proposition there. Let me get signups. Let me get users. So there are millions of ways. I mean, it took me about 1 month to really get into Ruby on Rails, which is a programming language. And you can see my code from before. Like, I'm not incredibly good at it, but I'm good enough to build an actual website in a weekend. And it took me about a month to kind of at least be able to do it a little bit. And of course, it's taken me more years to practice that, but I think it's just nonsense now. Like, there's so many easy ways to build stuff. And of course, if your dream is to build, you know, a robot with 6 arms that'll go to Mars, okay, maybe you don't have the resources to do that. Like, there are those circumstances. It doesn't help if you say, I have this great idea for a drug that will cure malaria, if you don't have, you know, the 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars it takes to bring a drug to market. Okay, but for the most part, for most of the ideas that people have, they're easily broken down into much smaller value propositions that can be solved. And I think the main reason that people say that, oh, I don't have the technology, I don't have the skills to do that, is because it's probably too complicated. Like, probably you have all these different features and buttons in your mind, when all you really need is to figure out what that one thing is. Like, what's the one thing that the people really want? Because that's what most people want. They just want one thing. They don't want the 500 buttons. Like, that's confusing. You guys know the joke about the soup in the supermarket? It's not a joke, really. I think it's a joke. It's you go to the supermarket, you want to buy a can of tomato soup. You go to the aisle with tomato soup, and you see there's 3 cans. Okay, so you pick a can of tomato soup and you go to the market and you pay for it. Great, problem solved. You go to the supermarket. The next time you go in, you go to the soup aisle, and you see there's 100 different types of tomato soup from all different vendors. And so you look at it, and then you turn around and you buy some spaghetti and you go home. Okay. More choices is very often the worst possible thing you can do, particularly for a website. You just can't have that many buttons and things flashing at you. But also for a real product, like, do we really want a air conditioner system with 800 buttons? I can show you a really funny picture if you're interested of a light switch in a professional conference community where I could not figure out how to turn on the lights. Like, could not. Too many buttons. I consider myself a reasonably intelligent person, but I could not get the lights on. Apparently there was a master switch somewhere completely else. So anyway, sorry, hope that answers your question. Other questions?
I have question about metrics, because there are, even if you go in Google Analytics, there are at least 250 things to measure. What should be in really startup learning process is main 2-3 metrics? What should we focus on?
I think that's an awesome question. So the question is, what metrics, what should you actually measure? So again, my preference, I'm very much from the user experience perspective. I think you should measure going out and talking to people and looking at their faces. So when you say like, hey, like I broke my ankle. Do you have foot pain? Yes, I have foot pain. And you see it on their face and they say, yeah, that's incredibly painful. Like, are your neighbors noisy? Yes! You can see it on their face. And the more pain the person's in, the longer and louder they'll complain. It's a very easy metric. If they talk for 10 minutes, you found a problem. If they say, yes, I have a problem, you didn't find anything. But I would also recommend you look at, Dave McClure was here in Tallinn a few days ago. He wrote something called Startup Metrics for Pirates. It's called ARR. It's pirate-based, but it's acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. He says those 5 metrics are the best dashboard. I would go one step further. I recommend you just Google Startup Metrics for Pirates. You'll find it. It's a very good presentation, although it hurts your eyes a lot. Dave likes to make it yellow on black. It's very hard to read. And he says, I would go one step further and say, out of those 5 metrics, once you've determined that, pick one. It's the only thing that matters. You're only going to be able to change one in the next week. I mean, if you're thinking about the next year, you're thinking too complicated. Like, the very first thing, can I get anybody even to come to the website? Even if it's handing out flyers at the supermarket. You know, how can I get enough people so that I can test the next metric? So again, like, what is the channel so that I can get a customer to test my value proposition and get feedback? And then, will anybody actually use it? Do they actually pick it up and buy it? So that would be an activation metric. So in most cases, you want to focus on the activation metric, but you have to do at least a little work on getting people to the website or to your store before you can even test that. And then once you have at least a reasonable conversion rate on activation, then of course you want to see, will those people come back? So deciding whether or not your business model is focused around the activation metric or the retention metric is really important for growth. So some companies have a very low activation metric, but those customers, once they're there for life, like Facebook. Like, I hate Facebook sometimes, but I keep going back every day. I don't know why. It's just like when I open my browser, it magically opens. There's no way around it. So that was a very high retention metric. There are a lot of other companies that focus on different metrics. Very few companies can optimize many metrics at one time. So, and I think for a startup phase, just what can I do this week? What am I going to focus on this week? And if you have a team, make sure that everybody knows that one metric. So time for one more question, I think.
Wait for the mic.
I think they're very concerned about having everything recorded here, so you have to say it on the microphone. It's very formal.
That's right. Well, I'm an engineer, and I think I can sell stuff. But on the other side, where the customer is, it's a big, heavy organization. I know there's people in pain there, behind like kind of a barrier or an obstacle, which is some kind of a manager. I know they are in bad pain, but I have kind of a problem going past that, filter or whatever you want to call the obstacle.
Yeah, gatekeeper sometimes.
Yeah. How do I it's a business-to-business sales.
Yeah.
I want to execute that.
So this isn't my strongest area of expertise, I have to confess to you. I did do some enterprise sales when I was in IT security. What I always found is that, so number one, you have to understand the different components of that organization. So business-to-business sales usually involve several different interest groups. Okay, there might be like a tech guy. So for IT security, for example, the pain that we're trying to solve is the risk of security breaches, right? But unfortunately, those of you who might work in a large organization know that the chief security officer rarely has any budget, like none. The budget belonged to the guys in the SAP group, so they get millions of dollars to implement SAP. They had all the money to pay for this stuff. So the security guy has to convince the other guys to actually buy the stuff. And then, of course, there are the other guys, the actual implementers, the IT guys, who are going to say, like, no, that's a really bad solution. So there's a lot of different interest groups. You actually have to understand all of them. I think your first challenge is to map out who are those different components. Like, who is the gatekeeper, who is the decider, and who is the money, and then who is the pain. Hopefully some of those people are the same. And really understand that you now have to solve a problem for all of them. You might have to solve a problem for the IT guy that's the cover your ass problem, right? Like, IT guy, all he cares about is 99.9% uptime. He needs to cover his ass. Your solution cannot disturb that at all. So he needs like a blank slate that says, no matter what on your solution, my job is fine. It's somebody else's problem. So this tends to be the really critical thing. Fortunately, again, if you find the early adopter, there are probably some companies which are suffering from this pain more than others. Those are the guys you need to really go after. So like find out very, very targeted, what is the context in which this organization has the most pain, and focus on like that narrow slice. There's something different between the companies that are suffering and have actually sent out their vendor relationship managers to look for a solution, and those companies that are like kind of, somebody in that company has a problem, but they don't really care. They're not looking. Find the people who are actively looking for a solution. And then talk to Sean Murphy. Sean Murphy is very good at that. Yeah, I do.
I just heard that we have, 10 minutes more? If there's more questions, and if you're up for it, Tristan.
Yeah, sure.
So are there any more questions in general? Otherwise, I have one. So I'm wondering, what do you currently see in Silicon Valley as let's say, the new success stories where you see that execution is extremely well done? Do you know any examples?
I know some personal examples. I'm really impressed with what Soldsy is doing. Like, nobody knows that company, but it's one of those bizarre kind of things that looks like a black swan to me. So Soldsy, so a black swan company is like one of those companies that sounds like a terrible idea. Like, you hear it and you're like, that will never work. But it intersects with a set of companies that is actually a really good idea. And they sell, they allow people on Facebook to sell products through the comments. So not through a store, okay, through the comments. So they'll post a picture of this item, and they'll say, anybody who wants to buy it, just write your email in the comments section. And like, I heard this and I thought, like, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Nobody's going to write their email on a public board so that they can just get tons of spam. And I was completely wrong. Totally wrong. And they proved it. Like, they went out and talked to people. They found people who were actually doing this. Right? They were actually selling things through their comments. Apparently there was this whole like large group of people that were doing this and making real businesses, making millions of dollars a year selling things through the comment section of Facebook pages. And they executed like crazy. They were dedicated. Every week they would go out and talk to their customers. Even the engineers would go out and talk to their customers once a week to learn what the best solution was. So, and their product is now like scraping from Facebook and saying, aha, these people ordered, and automatically sending them invoices and facilitating that entire process. So that is like just a small example. That's a 500 startups company. Oh, and Luxor made the curriculum for 500 startups. Sorry, that's my sales pitch. so that really impressed me. The Instagram guys were obviously phenomenally awesome. Pinterest is ridiculously cool, but everybody knows about those. I like to mention the smaller guys, so I like Soldzy. I like this Mexican company that's just starting called Tentume. Their initial version of the product was actually a piece of paper. So it was a website to let people discover new music. You can hear the new music 10 seconds at a time. Their MVP, their first version of the product, was a piece of paper with drawn on like a button, so you can press play and press fast forward and press save. And this was, again, I was like, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Like, this will never work. Even though I suggested, like, yeah, go ahead and do it on paper. And I was like, it'll never work. But and they did it. And they went to a coffee shop with this piece of paper and with a tape recorder with an iPad with 10 seconds of phone and said, okay, I'm going to buy you a cup of coffee, and you press the button. And it turns out the guy was like, yeah, sure. Listen to 2 seconds. Nope, next song. Nope, next song. Nope, next. Oh, that song I like, and saved it. And then he would put another piece of paper, a sticky note, a yellow sticky note on top with the name of the artist that he saved. And they did this testing, and like that to me is phenomenal execution of learning, because they learned something immediately. They learned that people would actually do this behavior, this really weird behavior, that they would learn whether or not they wanted to save the music in 2 seconds, not 10 seconds, and that it was addictive. Like this guy went way beyond his cup of coffee and was pressing this thing all the time. Right? It was really fun for him. So they learned something fascinating about this, and they learned that their initial prototype for a user interface was okay. And then and only then they went out and they started coding it up, and now it's actually live. If you go to 10tune.me, Mexico, it's live, and I don't know if it'll be as successful as Instagram, but I look at it and my heart sings, because I'm like, you know what, even if they fail, they've got enough chances for the next time and the next time and the next time and the next time and the next time. So they'll have plenty of money left over to try other things. And they'll discover if there are any problems, like, immediately.
Awesome. Okay, any last questions, the public?
Before I can
Or online.
wire myself.
Cool. Then
'Kay.
it's a coincidence that you might mention this package here and that
Yeah,
you like it.
I do like it.
It's a Estonia-based company, Click and Grow. And as it happens, you'll get one of those.
Oh, really? I will? Awesome.
So, so big round of applause. Tristan, thanks a lot.
That's very nice. It'll replace my plant.